She stopped calling. He stopped texting. The group chat went quiet. And you sat there, wondering what you did wrong. When the truth is, you didn't do anything wrong. You did something right. You grew. And growth is the one thing certain relationships cannot survive. That sentence is the whole video. Everything after this is proof. When people disappear from your life, not through cruelty, not through a dramatic fight, but through a slow, unexplained fade, it is rarely punishment. It is curation. Something wiser than your ego is editing the cast of your life, and it is doing it faster than your heart can process. This is the part nobody prepares you for. The grief of losing someone who was never actually taken from you by force. They were removed by alignment, and alignment doesn't ask your permission. Here is the first idea, and I want you to sit with it before we go further, because everything else in this speech builds from it. Every person who enters your life falls into one of three categories, and almost nobody is taught to recognize which category they're dealing with until it's categories. Too late. Some people are there for a reason, a specific chapter, a specific lesson, a specific wound they were sent to expose so you could finally heal it. Some people are there for a season, a stretch of time where your rhythms matched, your pace matched, your hunger for life matched. And then one of you kept walking while the other sat down. And some people are there for a lifetime. Rare, quiet, undemanding. The ones who don't need a reason, because their presence simply is the reason. The tragedy of most human relationships isn't that people leave. It's that we keep trying to force reason people and season people into lifetime roles, and then we call it heartbreak when the universe corrects our miscasting. Understand this clearly, because it will save you years of confusion. When someone is removed from your life, at the exact moment you begin evolving, it is not a coincidence, and it is not abandonment. It is closer to a biological law than a spiritual one. Every relationship you hold is built on a shared frequency, shared coping mechanisms, shared blind spots, shared appetite for a certain kind of chaos or a certain kind of comfort. The moment you shift that frequency, even slightly, the relationship starts to generate friction, because the other person's nervous system is calibrated to the old version of you. They don't reject you out of malice. They reject the unfamiliar signal you're now transmitting, because unfamiliar signals feel like threats to a mind that built its entire sense of safety around predicting you. This is why the people who vanish are so often not villains. They're not the toxic ex, not the backstabbing friend, not the parent who never apologized. Sometimes they're kind people, good people, people who loved an earlier draft of you and simply never got the update. And here is where most self-help content stops, with a comforting platitude about outgrowing people. But I want to go one layer deeper, because outgrowing someone is not painless, and pretending it is does you no favors. The pain of losing someone through growth is a specific, nameable psychological phenomenon, ambiguous loss. Coined by researcher Pauline Boss, ambiguous loss describes grief without closure. Loss where the person is still alive, still exists, still might respond to a text, but the relationship as you knew it is gone. Ambiguous loss is uniquely brutal, because your brain cannot file it away the way it files a clean ending. A funeral gives your mind a ritual, a date, a box to check. A slow fade gives your mind nothing but an open loop, and open loops are what the brain obsesses over. This is why you replay the last conversation at 2 a.m. more than you ever replayed conversations with people who died. Death closes the file. Fading leaves it open indefinitely, and your mind, starved for resolution, keeps returning to reread a story that has no more pages. So before we talk about healing, I want you to release yourself from a lie you've probably been carrying. The lie that if the ending isn't clean, it isn't real. It is real. Their absence is real. Your grief is valid even though nobody died, even though there was no final fight, even though you can still see their name in your contacts. You are allowed to mourn a person who is technically still alive, because you are not mourning their existence. You are mourning the version of the relationship that no longer exists. And that version is dead, even if the person is not. Now here is where the removal becomes something other than loss. It becomes information. Every person who exits your life at the moment of your transformation is handing you data about what your old life required to sustain itself. If someone can only tolerate you when you're small, anxious, apologetic, over-explaining, shrinking to keep the peace, their exit the moment you stop shrinking tells you the relationship was never built on you. It was built on your compliance. And compliance is not connection. It only feels like connection because it's quiet, and we've been trained to mistake quiet for peace. This is the first psychological weapon I want to hand you in this speech, and I'm only going to explain it once, in full, so absorb it now. The concept of relational homeostasis. Every system, a family, a friend group, a marriage, a company, seeks equilibrium. Equilibrium doesn't mean health. It means familiarity. A system will fight to keep its familiar pattern even if that pattern is dysfunctional. Because familiar dysfunction feels safer to the nervous system than unfamiliar health. When you begin healing, setting boundaries, speaking your needs, refusing to absorb blame that isn't yours, you are not just changing yourself. You are destabilizing the equilibrium of every relationship built around the old you. And systems under threat of destabilization do one of two things. They adapt, or they expel the source of disruption. Most people, most families, most friend groups, they expel, not out of evil, out of a desperate, unconscious need to return to the equilibrium they know how to survive in. There's a related idea worth naming here, because it explains why the most painful departures often involve the people who once knew you best. Call it the mirror principle. The closer someone stands to you, the more precisely they reflect back, not just your strengths, but the specific compromises you made to keep the relationship intact. A stranger cannot show you where you shrink, because a stranger never saw you at full size to begin with. Only the people who witnessed both versions, the smaller one and the one now emerging, can hold up a mirror sharp enough to make the shrinking undeniable. This is why losing someone close often triggers a far more disorienting reckoning than losing an acquaintance. The mirror they were holding up goes with them, and for a while, you're left without a reflection at all, forced to build your sense of self from an internal source rather than borrowed proof from someone else's eyes. That disorientation is not damage. It's the exact moment self-recognition, rather than external validation, is finally required of you. This reframes everything. The people who left weren't rejecting you. They were protecting a homeostasis that your healing threatened. And you cannot blame water for seeking its own level. And you cannot blame a system for defending its equilibrium. You can only recognize it, stop personalizing it, and understand that their retreat was never so proof of your unworthiness. It was proof that you had become someone their old operating system could no longer process. There's a second layer beneath this, one that almost nobody names directly. The difference between losing a person and losing a role. When someone leaves, your grief is rarely only about them as an individual. It's about the function they served, the person you called first, the one who made you laugh on your worst days, the one who knew your order at the coffee shop without asking. When they go, that function goes vacant. And the human mind treats a vacant function like an emergency. Because for most of our evolutionary history, an unfilled role in your social circle meant unfilled protection, unfilled resources, unfilled survival. Your panic at their absence is not weakness. It's an ancient alarm system doing exactly what it was built to do, except the emergency it is. Warning you about no longer threatens your survival the way it once did. You will not starve because a friend stopped calling. You will not be exiled from the tribe because a relationship ended. But your nervous system doesn't know the difference between social loss in the year 2026 and social death on a savanna 10,000 years ago. And this is precisely why the pain of being removed from someone's life can feel disproportionate to the actual, practical consequences. Naming this, recognizing that your alarm system is outdated hardware, reacting to modern, Software is the first step toward not being ruled by it. We are only beginning. What comes next is not comfort. It's a rebuilding of how you interpret every disappearance in your life from this day forward. Consider a story that almost never gets told through this lens. A young man is sold into slavery by his own brothers, the people who should have protected him. The people whose absence should have been the deepest wound of his life. He is stripped of his home, his name, his status, dragged into a foreign land, imprisoned on a false accusation, forgotten by the very people he helped while inside that prison. By every measure available to him at the time, his life had been destroyed by removal. The people who were supposed to stay, left. The people who promised to remember, forgot. And yet, years later, that same man ends up positioned to save the very family that discarded him. And when he finally faces his brothers, he says something that should be studied in every psychology course on forgiveness. You intended it for evil, but it was used for good. Notice what he does not say. He does not say the betrayal didn't hurt. He does not say it was fine, or that they were secretly right to do it. He says something far more advanced, that a single event can carry two true meanings at once. It can be a genuine wound and a necessary redirection simultaneously. This is the psychological skill most people never develop. The ability to hold betrayal and purpose in the same hand without needing one to cancel out the other. This brings us to the second concept I want to give you in full, only once, so you can carry it forward without me repeating it. The difference between forgiveness as forgetting and forgiveness as reinterpretation. Most people believe forgiveness means pretending the wound didn't happen, or reconciling with the person who caused it. Neither is required. Reinterpretation means you take the same set of facts. They left, they lied, they chose someone else, they went silent, and you build a new narrative around those facts that no longer casts you as the victim of an ending, but as the survivor of a filtering. The facts don't change. Your relationship to the facts changes. And that shift alone is what determines whether you spend the next 5 years bitter, or the next 5 years building. Before we get to the chemistry of that bond, there's a specific blind spot worth naming, because it explains why the people closest to real harm are so often the last to see it clearly. Psychologist Jennifer Freyd's research on betrayal trauma identified a mechanism she called betrayal blindness, the tendency to remain unaware of mistreatment, specifically when the person causing it is someone you depend on for safety, belonging, or survival. The dependency itself creates the blindness. It is not a failure of intelligence or self-respect. It is a protective mechanism, because fully registering betrayal from someone you cannot afford to lose would make daily functioning unbearable. This is why so many people only recognize the pattern of a relationship years after it ends, once distance removes the dependency that was clouding the view. If you find yourself only now seeing clearly what someone's presence obscured for years, that delay was never proof of your foolishness. It was proof of how much you needed the connection to feel safe, and needing safety is not a character flaw. Now let's talk about what happens biologically when someone you're emotionally bonded to disappears, because this is where most people misjudge their own pain, as a character flaw rather than what it actually is. Chemistry. When you form a close attachment to someone, your brain begins producing oxytocin during your interactions, alongside dopamine spikes tied to anticipation, the notification sound, the sight of their name, the plan to see them again. Over time, this isn't just emotional. It becomes a chemical dependency, the same neural pathways used in substance attachment. This is why losing a close person can produce symptoms that mirror withdrawal, restlessness, obsessive thinking, disrupted sleep, a phantom urge to check your phone even when you know they won't respond. You are not weak for feeling like you're withdrawing from a person. You are, biologically, withdrawing from a person. Understanding this changes the entire tone of your recovery, because you stop asking why can't I just get over it, and start asking the more accurate question: how long does a dopamine pathway take to rewire, and what do I feed it instead? The answer, uncomfortably, is that you cannot simply stop wanting the connection through willpower. You have to starve the old pathway by refusing to feed it. No checking their profile. No rehearsing the reunion speech in your head. No keeping the relationship on emotional life. Support through occasional contact that reopens the wound just enough to keep it fresh. Every time you reach out just to see, you are not testing whether they've changed. You are re-injecting the drug and restarting the withdrawal clock from zero. This is not a metaphor for discipline. It is neurological fact, and it is the single most practical piece of information in this entire speech, because it explains why so many people feel like they've healed from someone only to feel shattered again the moment that person resurfaces with one text. You didn't relapse because you're fragile. You relapsed because the pathway was never fully starved. There's something darker underneath all of this that deserves to be said plainly. Because pretending it doesn't exist helps no one. Some people don't leave your life because you grew. Some people leave because they were never emotionally capable of staying in the first place. And your growth simply removed the excuse they were using to delay the inevitable. This distinction matters enormously, because if you assume every departure was a noble filtering of misalignment, you risk excusing genuine harm, narcissistic abandonment, exploitative friendships, people who drained you for years, and left the moment you stopped being useful. Not every exit is a cosmic edit. Some exits are simply confirmation that a person was never invested in you as a whole human, being only in the function you performed for them. The wisdom isn't in romanticizing every loss equally. The wisdom is in asking a single, sharp diagnostic question about each person who has vanished. Did they leave because I stopped being someone they could use? Or did they leave because I stopped being someone they could understand? The first is exposure. The second is misalignment. Both hurt. Only one is worth grieving with tenderness rather than relief. This is where a colder, more clarifying psychological principle enters: the audit. Picture your life not as a fixed circle of relationships, but as a rotating board of directors. One that quietly reviews itself on a schedule you don't control, and rarely notice happening in real time. Every major transition in your life, a new job, a breakup, a health scare, a spiritual shift, a period of intense self-work, triggers an audit. The people who can only operate at your previous capacity get quietly voted off the board. The people who can meet you at your new capacity get promoted, even if you barely spoke to them before. This is why you'll sometimes watch a decade-long friendship dissolve in the same month. A stranger from a seminar becomes one of the most important people in your life. It isn't loyalty that determines who stays. It's capacity. And capacity is not a moral judgment. It's simply a measurement of who can hold the version of you that's currently forming. Most people fight the audit. They try to keep every board member regardless of whether that member still serves the direction the company, meaning your life, is now heading. This is where self-betrayal quietly begins, because keeping someone on your board past their expiration date always requires you to shrink your own agenda to fit their comfort level. You start editing your dreams down to a size they can tolerate hearing about. You start softening your ambitions so they don't feel threatened. You start apologizing for wanting more, because wanting more highlights the gap between where you're going and where they're squared. More decided to stay. This is not partnership. This is a slow, voluntary demotion of your own life to preserve someone else's comfort, and it is one of the most common and least discussed forms of self-sabotage that exists. So the audit is not cruelty. It is your life protecting its own trajectory from being quietly hijacked by people who mean well but no longer belong on the route you're taking. And once you stop resisting the audit, once you let it run without lobbying on behalf of people who have already voted themselves out through their own retreat, something unexpected happens. The grief doesn't disappear, but it stops metastasizing into self-doubt. It becomes clean sorrow instead of corrosive shame. Clean sorrow says, I miss who they were to me. Corrosive shame says, something is wrong with me for not being enough to keep them. Only one of those statements is true, and it is never the second one. What we haven't yet examined is what happens to your own identity in the space the audit creates. And that space is far more dangerous and far more powerful than most people realize. Gardeners have a term that carries more psychological precision than most therapy vocabulary: pruning. A plant left entirely unpruned doesn't grow more. It grows less, because energy that should concentrate into strong new branches gets diffused across every surviving one, including the weak, diseased, and dying growth that a healthier plant would have shed naturally. Pruning isn't punishment inflicted on the plant. It's a redirection of finite resources toward the growth that can actually bear fruit. The branches removed were never going to produce anything, regardless of how long they were kept attached. Keeping them only cost the plant nutrients it could have spent elsewhere. Relationships operate on the same finite resource logic, except the resource is your attention, your emotional labor, your hope. A relationship that was never going to reach fruition, not because either person was bad, but because the growth required for fruition had already stopped, draws resources away from the arc, parts of your life that still have the capacity to bear something real. Its removal is not evidence of failure. It is the exact mechanism by which your remaining capacity gets concentrated somewhere it can actually be used. There is a phenomenon in ecology called competitive release. When a dominant species is removed from an environment through disease, migration, or extinction, the species that were previously suppressed by that dominance suddenly expand into the space it left behind. Nothing new was created. The capacity was always there. It simply had no room to express itself while the dominant species occupied the resources. Human relationships work on an almost identical mechanism, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it in your own life. The people who occupied the most emotional space in your world, even lovingly, even without malice, were also, without meaning to, suppressing other parts of you that never got room to grow while you were busy maintaining that connection. The friend who needed constant reassurance kept you in a permanent caretaking role, which suppressed your own ambition because there was no bandwidth left to focus on yourself after tending to them. The partner who needed you small kept your confidence suppressed, not through direct sabotage, but simply because your confidence made the relationship's power balance uncomfortable. So you learned, quietly, to keep it dimmed. When these people exit, you are not left with a void. You are left with room, and what expands into that room is whichever part of you was waiting the storm longest. This is why so many people report feeling an unexpected surge of energy, ambition, or clarity in the months following a painful separation, even while they're still grieving. It confuses them, because they think grief and growth cannot coexist, and they assume the surge of energy means they didn't love the person enough. This is false. The two are not contradictory. You can mourn the person and still feel your suppressed self expanding into the space they vacated, because grief lives in the heart and expansion lives in the capacity that was freed. They are not competing emotions. They are simply occurring in different rooms of the same house. Now I want to introduce a distinction that ancient philosophy mapped out with more precision than most modern psychology bothers to, because it changes how you respond the next time someone walks away. The Stoics built an entire philosophical framework around what they called the dichotomy of control, the radical, disciplined separation between what is within your power and what is entirely outside it. Epictetus, born into slavery, stripped of nearly every external control a person can be stripped of, built a philosophy that has outlasted empires on a single foundation. Your opinions, your desires, your reactions are yours to command. Everything else, other people's choices, other people's loyalty, other people's capacity to stay, was never yours to command in the first place. It only felt like yours because you had convinced yourself that enough love, enough effort, enough sacrifice could guarantee an outcome that was never within your jurisdiction to guarantee. This reframes the entire experience of being left. You did not fail to control something you were supposed to control. You succeeded in mistaking someone else's autonomy for your own responsibility. And the pain, you feel now is partly the pain of relinquishing an illusion of control you never actually held. This is not meant to minimize the loss. It's meant to relocate where your power actually lives. Because as long as you keep searching for power in someone else's decision to stay or go, you will keep finding yourself powerless. The moment you relocate that power to your own response, your own reinterpretation, your own next action, you stop being a passenger in your own healing. There's a companion Stoic concept that deserves its own explanation, because it's frequently misquoted and rarely understood. Amor fati, the love of fate. This is not passive resignation. It is not, everything happens for a reason, recited as a comforting slogan to avoid feeling pain. Amor fati is an active discipline, the deliberate choice to relate to what has already happened, as necessary material for what you are building next, rather than as a mistake the universe made that you now have to recover from. It is the difference between saying, "This shouldn't have happened to me," and saying, "This happened, and I will now make it structurally load-bearing in who I become." One stance keeps you in a permanent argument with reality, which is a fight you cannot win, because reality has already occurred and does not negotiate retroactively. The other stance takes the exact same event and repositions it as raw material, the way a sculptor doesn't get to choose the grain of the marble, but absolutely gets to choose what emerges from it. There is a psychological cost to skipping this step that I want to name directly, because it explains a pattern you've almost certainly seen in people around you, or in yourself. When someone refuses to practice any version of amor fati, when they remain permanently at war, with an ending instead of metabolizing it, they don't heal faster by staying angry longer. They calcify. The anger doesn't protect them from future hurt. It just becomes the lens through which they interpret every new relationship, seeing threats and abandonment in situations that don't contain either, because they never finished processing the original wound. This is how one person's departure from your life, left unprocessed, can quietly sabotage every relationship that comes after it, years later, with people who had nothing to do with the original loss. Let's talk about what loyalty actually costs when it is directed at a version of you that no longer exists, because this is where many people get trapped for years without realizing it. There is a specific kind of grief that has nothing to do with someone leaving, and everything to do with someone staying loyal not to you, the person you've become, but to who you used to be. This is subtler and, in some ways, more disorienting than an outright departure, because the person is physically present, still calling, still showing up, but they are in a relationship with a version of you that retired long ago. They laugh at the old jokes that no longer represent your sense of humor. They bring up the old insecurities, as if they're still your defining traits. They relate to you through a photograph taken years ago, refusing to update the frame even as the picture inside it has completely changed. This is a quieter form of removal, not removal of the person, but removal of the possibility of being truly seen by them, and it deserves to be grieved with the same honesty as an outright goodbye. Because in some ways, it is harder to leave a relationship where the body stayed but the recognition never returned. The question this raises is uncomfortable, but necessary. How do you know the difference between someone who needs time to catch up to your growth and someone who will never catch up, no matter how much time you give them? The answer lies not in their words, but in their curiosity. People who will eventually meet your new capacity ask questions about who you're becoming, even clumsily, even with hesitation. People who will never meet it stop asking questions altogether, and instead start making quits. Statements about who you really are. Statements that conveniently freeze you at a stage that was easier for them to manage. Curiosity is evidence of a relationship that can evolve. Certainty about an old version of you is evidence of a relationship that has already decided not to. Knowing this changes what you do next. It stops being about waiting for people to leave or forcing them to stay, and starts being about something far more deliberate, what you build inside the silence they leave behind. Solitude has a terrible reputation, and it has earned that reputation dishonestly. Most people conflate solitude with loneliness, treating the two as synonyms, when they describe almost opposite psychological states. Loneliness is the ache of wanting connection you don't have. Solitude is the deliberate, chosen absence of noise, so that a signal underneath it can finally be heard. The nervous system cannot always tell them apart at first. Both can produce the same restless, unsettled feeling in the body, but the outcomes diverge completely depending on what you do with the silence. Loneliness left unaddressed corrodes. Solitude, engaged with intention, forges. There's a specific neurological structure worth understanding here, because it explains why removal from certain relationships often precedes a person's most significant personal breakthroughs, rather than following their most stable, crowded seasons. The brain has what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a set of regions that activate not when you're focused on an external task, but when your mind is left unstructured, wandering, undirected. This network is heavily involved in self-referential thought, reflecting on your identity, integrating past experiences into a coherent narrative, imagining future possibilities. Constant social stimulation, a packed calendar, a phone that never stops buzzing, relationships that require perpetual maintenance and management, actually suppresses this network's activity, because attention is being consumed by external demands rather than internal integration. This means a life crowded with people, even people you love, can leave almost no room for your default mode network to do its most important work, making sense of who you actually are, separate from who everyone around you needs you to be. When people are removed from your life, and the calendar empties, and the phone goes quiet, you are not simply losing company. You are being handed back access to a part of your own mind that had been crowded out. This is deeply uncomfortable at first, because that mental space had been avoided for a reason. It often contains unresolved questions people have been outrunning for years, using the noise of constant company as a distraction. But avoidance has a cost that compounds silently. Every year you outrun those questions, using other people's presence. As a buffer is a year those questions get louder, not quieter, and eventually the volume required to keep drowning them out becomes unsustainable. History offers a striking, literal example of this exact split. In 1934, the polar explorer Richard Byrd chose to spend nearly 5 months alone at a weather station in Antarctica, buried in snow, cut off from nearly all human contact through the darkest stretch of polar winter. Early in his memoir of that period, he admits he expected the solitude to sharpen him into something like a philosopher king, master of his own undisturbed mind. Instead, he nearly died, not from the cold, but from carbon monoxide slowly leaking from a faulty stove, poisoning him for weeks while he misread the resulting symptoms as ordinary loneliness and self-doubt. What saved him wasn't the solitude itself, and it wasn't willpower. It was his eventual refusal to keep interpreting his declining condition through the lens of personal weakness, forcing himself instead to investigate the actual, external cause. The lesson buried in that account is easy to miss. If you only remember the drama of near death in The Ice, isolation will hand you real information, but it will also hand you false interpretations if you're not disciplined about separating the two. The silence left by someone's absence works the same way. It surfaces real signals about what needs to change in your life, but it will just as easily manufacture false ones, harsh self-judgments that feel true simply because there's no other voice in the room to contradict them. Learning to interrogate what the silence tells you, rather than accepting its first conclusion automatically, is what separates the version of solitude that clarifies from the version that slowly poisons. There's a well-documented pattern among people forced into extended isolation: prisoners of war, shipwrecked sailors, individuals in long solitary confinement, monks who choose the isolation voluntarily, and the pattern splits into two distinct outcomes depending entirely on one variable: whether the person treated the isolation as punishment or as material. Those who treated it purely as punishment, as something being done to them, tended to deteriorate, rumination without resolution, anxiety without an outlet, time experienced as an enemy to be endured. Those who treated the same isolation as material, something to be worked with rather than merely survived, often emerged with a level of internal clarity, discipline, and self-command that years of ordinary, socially crowded life rarely produces. The isolation itself wasn't the variable that determined the outcome. The relationship to the isolation was. This single distinction is the difference between someone who is broken by being left alone and someone who is built by it. And the difference has almost nothing to do with the severity of the isolation and almost everything to do with the story the person tells themselves about what the silence is for. This is where I want to introduce something I'll call the vacancy principle, because it names a phenomenon most people experience but rarely articulate. Every relationship you hold occupies a kind of psychological real estate. It takes up mental space, emotional bandwidth, calendar time, identity real estate in how you describe your life to others. When a person is removed, that real estate does not stay empty for long, whether you consciously manage it or not. Something will move into that vacancy. The only real choice you have is whether you fill it deliberately or whether you let it get filled by whatever arrives first. Often anxiety, often a rebound relationship built on the fear of the same vacancy happening again, often a compulsive return to old habits that numb rather than heal. The vacancy principle says, grief creates a temporary window of unusual plasticity, a period when your identity is more moldable than usual, because the structure that used to hold a fixed shape has just been removed. This window will close eventually, and whatever you build during it, consciously or by default, tends to calcify into the next long-term pattern of your life. This is why the weeks and months immediately following a significant loss are disproportionately important. Not because you should rush your grieving, but because what you allow to move into that vacant space quietly sets the direction for years afterward. There's a practical distinction inside this principle that deserves to be named clearly. The difference between filling the vacancy and honoring it. Filling the vacancy means rushing to replace what was lost as quickly as possible. A new best friend to replace the old one. A new relationship to replace the last. A packed schedule to replace the silence. Driven by the discomfort of the empty space rather than genuine readiness. Honoring the vacancy means allowing the space to remain open long enough to reveal what actually belongs there, rather than what merely relieves the discomfort of its emptiness fastest. Almost every person who ends up in a painful cycle of repeating the same type of relationship over and over again did so because they filled the vacancy instead of honoring it. They grabbed the first available substitute for the discomfort of missing someone, rather than waiting to discover what their evolved self actually required from a relationship, which is often something entirely different from what the old relationship provided. Emotional intelligence enters here in a very specific, practical form. The ability to sit with an uncomfortable feeling long enough to extract its information before acting on it. Most people treat emotional discomfort as a problem to be solved immediately. The moment loneliness arises, reach for the phone, reach for distraction, reach for anything that interrupts the feeling. But every emotion carries a message before it fades, and interrupting it too early means you receive the discomfort without ever decoding what it was trying to tell you. Sitting with the ache of someone's absence, not indefinitely, not as self-punishment, but long enough to ask what it's actually pointing toward, often reveals that the ache isn't really about that specific person at all. It's about an unmet need for being understood, or being chosen, or being prioritized. A need that person happened to satisfy for a while, but which was never uniquely tied to them. Once you see the need underneath the person, you stop searching for that exact individual to return, and start building a life structured to meet that underlying need directly, through multiple sources, rather than gambling your entire emotional stability on one person's continued presence. This is the quiet, unglamorous work that most transformation content skips entirely in favor of comforting affirmations. It is not enough to say, "Let them go," as a slogan. Letting go, done properly, means identifying the specific psychological function a person served, grieving the loss of that function honestly, resisting the urge to numb the vacancy with the nearest available substitute, and then deliberately reconstructing a version of your life where that function is met by your own internal stability first, and by a wider, healthier circle of people second, never again by a single irreplaceable figure whose departure could collapse your entire sense of self a second time. There is one final piece left to give you, and it is the piece that turns everything we've covered from insight into practice. A way of thinking about these departures that you can carry into every future ending, not just the one you're living through now. There's an old distinction in editing, in film, in literature, in music production, between a cut that damages the work and a cut that reveals it. Anyone who has ever tried to create something knows the difference in their gut before they can articulate it in words. A damaging cut leaves a hole where meaning used to live. The piece feels incomplete, its rhythm broken, its message weakened. A revealing cut does the opposite. It removes something that was, without anyone quite noticing, muffling the actual signal underneath. And the moment it's gone, the whole piece becomes sharper, not smaller. Every editor learns to distrust their first instinct when reviewing a cut, because the instinct is almost always grief for what's missing, not recognition of what's now visible. That grief is real, and it deserves respect, but it is not, by itself, evidence that the cut was wrong. This is the final reframe I want to leave you with, and it is deliberately different from where we began, because repeating the opening idea here would waste the one thing a genuine ending is supposed to offer you: forward motion instead of a closed loop. We started by naming the confusion of unexplained absence, the group chat that goes quiet, the calls that stop. We end somewhere else entirely, with a method. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun spent decades studying people who endured severe loss, bereavement, illness, the collapse of long relationships, and they found something that resilience research alone had missed. Resilience describes returning to your previous baseline after hardship, bouncing back to who you were before. But a significant number of the people they studied didn't bounce back to their old baseline at all. They moved past it, developing what Tedeschi and Calhoun named post-traumatic growth. A deepened appreciation for life, stronger and more honest relationships going forward, a clearer sense of personal strength, new possibilities they wouldn't have considered before the loss, and in many cases, a more developed spiritual or existential framework than they held previously. The critical detail their research surfaced is this: post-traumatic growth is not automatic, and it does not happen instead of pain. It happens alongside pain, and specifically through the effortful, deliberate cognitive processing of the event, not through the passage of time alone. Time by itself heals almost nothing. It is what you do with the time, the reinterpretation, the audit, the honoring of the vacancy, instead of rushing to fill it, that determines whether you eventually land back at your old baseline, or somewhere genuinely higher than where you started. Here is the method, stated plainly, so you can use it the next time someone is removed from your map and the old panic tries to convince you it means something is wrong with you. First, name the function, not just the person. Ask specifically what role they played, what need they met, so you can address that need directly, rather than mourning a vague, undifferentiated sense of loss that never resolves because it was never precisely identified. Second, allow the ambiguous loss its full weight, without rushing to closure it doesn't yet have. Resist the urge to manufacture a tidy story before you'd loss. Actually finished feeling what an untidy ending feels like, because grief rushed is grief postponed, not grief completed. Third, resist the immediate urge to fill the vacancy with the fastest available substitute, and instead, let the space stay open long enough to reveal what your evolved self actually requires, which is frequently not a replica of what was lost, but something you haven't yet met, because the old relationship was occupying the exact space where it would have entered. Fourth, Conduct your own audit rather than waiting for life to force one on you. Deliberately assess who in your circle can meet the person you submit rather than certainty, and stop performing shrinkage for the sake of those who can't. Fifth, and this is the piece almost nobody names, extend to yourself the same reinterpretation you'd extend to Joseph's story, or to anyone who was cut loose before their purpose was visible. Hold the possibility that this exact removal, painful as it is right now, is not evidence of your unworthiness, but the precise mechanism required to position you for something the old configuration of people around you could never have made room for. None of this requires you to believe the departure didn't hurt. It requires the opposite, that you take the hurt seriously enough to extract every piece of when-to information it's offering, rather than numbing it, rationalizing it away, or letting it curdle into a story about your own inadequacy that you carry unexamined into every relationship that follows. The people who are gone were real. What you had with them was real. And its ending, however unclean, however unexplained, however much it still stings when their name crosses your mind at an unexpected hour, does not need to be resolved by their return in order for you to move forward whole. It needs to be resolved by you, by the audit you conduct, by the function you rebuild inside yourself, by the vacancy you learn to honor instead of frantically filling, by the version of you that keeps walking even when the group photo has fewer people in it than it used to. Whatever, or whoever, was removed from your life at this particular moment did not leave you emptier. It left you accurate, an honest, current picture of exactly who has the capacity to walk beside the person you photo and wraith, actually becoming, rather than the person you used to perform for their comfort. That is not a loss to recover from. That is data you were finally allowed to see. If this reframed something for you, if it gave language to a departure you've been carrying without knowing how to name it, take 30 seconds and subscribe, because there's a great deal more of this coming. The psychology of who stays, who leaves, and why, explained the way it should have been explained to you years ago. Leave a like if a single sentence in this hit exactly where you needed it to, and share this with the one person you know who is quietly grieving someone who is technically still alive. They need to hear that the silence isn't proof of their unworthiness. It's proof that their life is finally being edited by something wiser than their fear of being in fear alone.